During the 12 years of existence of the Nazi regime, between 1933 and 1945, German industry set in motion a production effort that transformed the battlefield. Beginning in 1936, dozens of different models of military vehicles started leaving the factories, intended to operate on multiple fronts at the same time. These machines took part in combat ranging from the Spanish Civil War to the final campaigns in Europe, moving under extreme conditions. During this period, between 55 and 60 million people, civilians and soldiers, lost their lives, a figure unprecedented in history. In tanks alone, Germany produced around 49,000 units, not counting thousands of trucks, half-tracks, light vehicles, and special machines that sustained the war effort day after day. What were the machines that kept this system running? The development of German tanks began in a context marked by the restrictions imposed after the First World War, which forced progress to be made covertly while laying the foundations for a new mechanized force. In this scenario, the Panzerkampfwagen I appeared, the first German armored vehicle of the rearmament period, conceived primarily as a tool to train crews and initiate an armored doctrine that was still under construction. Its light and simple design responded more to the need to train drivers, gunners, and commanders than to the requirement of engaging other tanks directly in real combat. When these first vehicles reached the battlefield in 1936, they did so in an environment that served as a testing ground for German crews. Their participation quickly revealed the limitations of a tank armed only with machine guns and protected by minimal armor, although it also demonstrated that, under certain circumstances, it could fulfill its role within coordinated operations. This early experience was later transferred to the campaigns in Poland and France, where the Panzer I formed part of the rapid attacks that characterized the initial phases of the war, supported by air power and heavier units. Based on these first experiences, it became evident that a vehicle offering greater offensive capability was needed without abandoning lightness and mobility. Thus emerged the Panzerkampfwagen II, a model intended as an interim solution while more advanced tanks were being developed. Although its main role continued to be reconnaissance, it incorporated armament that allowed it to engage light vehicles more effectively and support infantry during advances. In the early campaigns, especially in Western Europe, this model constituted an important part of the German armored forces, participating in decisive operations during 1940. Throughout the conflict, the Panzer II assumed increasingly diverse roles. Some variants improved protection and equipment to prolong their use in reconnaissance missions, while others evolved into specialized versions, such as flamethrower tanks designed to attack fortified positions or experimental models aimed at reinforcing armor. Although it was gradually withdrawn from frontline units, its chassis continued to be used for years as the basis for other armored vehicles. Meanwhile, Germany incorporated tanks from the Czech industry into its arsenal following the annexation of Czechoslovakia. The Panzer 35T stood out for its build quality and for technical solutions that distinguished it from earlier German models. It was used in the early campaigns with acceptable results, integrating smoothly into armored divisions. Its successor, the Panzer 38T, earned an even greater reputation thanks to its reliability and armament that was effective during the first years of the conflict. These light tanks provided stability to the armored forces at a time when German production was still in the process of expansion. On this basis, German command advanced toward a more ambitious concept with the Panzerkampfwagen III, designed from the outset as the primary tank to engage other tanks. Its internal configuration allowed for a better distribution of tasks among the crew, facilitating coordination and control during combat. Since its appearance in 1936, this model gained prominence and became the backbone of the Panzer divisions during the campaigns in Poland, France, and the early years on the Eastern Front. When Germany launched the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Panzer III was the most numerous tank in service. Although its design offered advantages in terms of ergonomics and handling, it soon encountered opponents that exceeded its initial capabilities. The appearance of more resilient Soviet tanks forced continuous upgrades, strengthening armament and protection to maintain its usefulness in combat. Even so, as the war progressed, this model was increasingly relegated to secondary roles, although its chassis would continue to play an important role in other derived vehicles. In parallel, the Panzerkampfwagen IV evolved in a different way. Initially conceived as a support tank within armored units, it was gradually adapted until it became the true core of the German armored forces. From its entry into production in the mid-1930s, this model received constant improvements that allowed it to respond to the new demands of the battlefield and remain operational on all fronts, from Western Europe to the East, throughout the entire conflict. Faced with the growing effectiveness of enemy anti-tank weapons, the Panzer IV was reinforced and modified to remain relevant on the battlefield. Its production continued until the final months of the war, and its chassis gave rise to a wide family of specialized vehicles. This continuity made it the German tank with the greatest presence throughout the conflict and one of the pillars of the military industry of the Third Reich. The clash with the reality of the Eastern Front marked a turning point with the appearance of the Panzerkampfwagen V Panther. The first encounters with the Soviet T-34 revealed a series of advantages that forced a reconsideration of German tank design. From that moment on, the development of a new tank was accelerated, one that would combine protection, mobility, and firepower in a more balanced way. The result was the Panther, a model that incorporated solutions inspired by combat experience while maintaining its own distinct approach. The Panther entered service under conditions of urgency, which caused initial problems affecting its reliability. However, once these difficulties were overcome, it established itself as one of the most effective tanks of the war. Its presence was especially notable on the Eastern Front, although it also participated in combat in France and in the major offensives of the final years. Despite its qualities, its complexity and production demands limited the number of units available compared to Allied tanks. At a higher level, Germany introduced the Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger I, a heavy tank designed to dominate the battlefield through an unprecedented combination of protection and firepower. Its entry into service in 1942 had an immediate impact on enemy forces, as it could engage most Allied tanks from long distances. Although its construction was costly and required significant resources, the Tiger I became a symbol of German armored power during the middle years of the war. The Tiger I established itself as a vehicle of great power on the battlefield, although it carried significant limitations derived from its own design. Its high weight and mechanical complexity made maintenance and transport demanding, and its presence in units never reached a massive scale. Even so, wherever it appeared, it forced enemy forces to adjust procedures and tactics, driving a constant response in the development of weapons and methods to counter it within the changing environment of armored warfare. Within this evolution appeared the Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger II, known as the King Tiger. This model combined extreme armor with a design aimed at maximizing frontal resistance, making it one of the most imposing tanks of the conflict. Its introduction was intended to maintain superiority over increasingly powerful enemy vehicles, although the increase in weight and complexity brought mechanical and logistical problems that limited its operational effectiveness on the battlefield. The Tiger II was deployed by both German Army units and Waffen-SS formations, integrating into heavy tank companies assigned to specific missions. Its impact in combat was considerable, but its complexity and the resources required to keep it operational reflected the growing difficulties faced by German industry in the final years of the conflict. With the need for even more compact solutions, Germany turned to captured or already proven chassis to develop small, hard-to-detect tank destroyers. The Jagdpanzer 38T, known as the Hetzer, emerged as a direct response to this demand. Its small size and angular shapes allowed it to hide easily in urban or wooded terrain, from where it could strike without being seen. The sloped layout of its frontal armor increased its chances of withstanding hits, while its internally operated machine gun allowed it to defend itself without exposing the crew. Meanwhile, the development of a more powerful tank destroyer led to the Jagdpanzer IV, built on the Panzer IV chassis. This vehicle combined a long-barreled gun capable of engaging enemy tanks at long range with a low profile that made it well-suited for defensive roles. Its design concentrated much of the weight at the front, earning it a nickname among German commanders, yet it proved effective when employed from prepared positions, especially in defensive tasks. In parallel, pressure on the Eastern Front forced the improvisation of rapid solutions. Thus, the Marder series was born, vehicles that mounted powerful anti-tank guns on chassis already considered obsolete. The Marder II used the Panzer II chassis and provided an immediate solution to equip units with a weapon capable of facing the new enemy tanks. Its open-topped design exposed the crew to enemy fire and environmental conditions, limiting its use to specific defensive situations and relatively secure positions. The Marder III followed the same basic idea but introduced important differences by using the Czech 38T chassis, which was more reliable and better suited to the weight of the armament. This model could mount both captured enemy guns and more modern German weapons, expanding its operational possibilities. Thanks to this more solid base, it was employed more regularly to stop enemy advances before they reached the main lines, always from prepared positions and avoiding prolonged direct combat. When an increase in the range of these weapons was sought, the Nashorn appeared. This vehicle was optimized for long-range combat, operating from elevated or well-camouflaged positions. Its design prioritized the installation of a highly powerful gun capable of destroying enemy tanks before they had the opportunity to respond. To achieve this, almost all protection was sacrificed, relying on distance, concealment, and accuracy as the primary means of survival on the battlefield. The natural evolution of this concept materialized in the Jagd Panther. Using the Panther chassis, this tank destroyer achieved a remarkable balance between mobility, protection, and firepower. Its design allowed it to accompany armored units and engage enemy tanks under more balanced conditions. Thanks to this combination, the Jagd Panther is considered by many to be one of the most complete tank destroyers of the conflict, capable of adapting to different combat situations without relying exclusively on distance. However, not all developments followed a balanced path. The Ferdinand, later known as the Elephant, was built on chassis that had been discarded in other projects. Its design prioritized extreme protection and a very powerful gun, but neglected practical aspects such as close-range defense. In its early versions, the absence of a machine gun to repel enemy infantry made it vulnerable when surrounded. Even so, from prepared positions, its destructive capability was considerable. The Jagdtiger took the concept of the heavy tank destroyer to an unprecedented scale within the conflict. Conceived to mount one of the most powerful guns available, it was intended to engage any enemy tank at long range. However, this same approach resulted in extreme weight that conditioned its use. Mechanical breakdowns were frequent, mobility was severely limited, and maintenance required a considerable effort, restricting its employment to very specific contexts and to a limited number of units during the final years of the war. As the war progressed and the need arose to accompany troops on the move, the German army began transferring heavy artillery pieces to self-propelled platforms. The intention was clear: to bring supporting fire directly to the front without relying on fixed positions or long deployment times. This pursuit led to a series of vehicles that, although very different from one another, shared the idea of combining firepower with mobility. One of the first attempts was the Sturmpanzer I Bison, a vehicle that mounted a heavy artillery piece on a light chassis. The result was an unbalanced machine with a high center of gravity and unstable handling, but it fulfilled a specific function in the early stages of the conflict. Its presence allowed large-caliber fire to be brought to where it was needed, albeit at the cost of straining a platform not originally designed for such a load. With the experience gained, a more balanced solution emerged in the Vesper. This vehicle used a more suitable chassis for carrying light artillery and offered an effective combination of mobility and support capability. Its speed allowed it to move with advancing units, fire, and quickly change positions, acting as a close support element capable of responding almost immediately to the needs of the front. When longer-range strikes were required, the Hummel appeared. Equipped with a heavy howitzer, this vehicle was intended to provide indirect fire from more distant positions. Its power was considerable, although the available space forced a limit on the ammunition carried, making a constant logistical chain essential. The Hummel served more as sustained rear support within mobile formations than as immediate frontline assistance. In a role closer to the front, the grille was designed to provide direct support to infantry during advances. Mounted on a proven chassis, it carried a gun intended to attack fortifications and defensive positions. Its function was not long-range combat, but to open the way through fortified areas, providing direct fire capable of disrupting enemy defenses before the infantry made contact. As urban combat gained prominence, the need for vehicles specialized for this environment became clear. The Sturmpanzer IV Brummbär met this demand with a design focused on destroying buildings and bunkers. Its main weapon was intended to demolish solid structures, allowing streets and fortified positions to be cleared during urban fighting. Its use was concentrated in scenarios where advancement depended on neutralizing well-protected defenses at close range. The Sturmtiger took this approach into an even more specialized realm. Built on a heavy chassis, it was armed with a large-caliber rocket launcher, intended to cause massive damage to very specific targets, such as fortified buildings or particularly resistant positions. It was not a vehicle designed for general operations, but to intervene in very specific scenarios where immediate and decisive effect was sought. For this reason, its production was limited, and its use was confined to specific situations within the conflict. Meanwhile, the constant threat from the air-forced vehicles to be adapted for mobile anti-aircraft defense. The flak Panzer IV Wirbelwind was one of the most direct responses to this problem. Equipped with multiple rapid-fire guns, it created an effective barrier against low-flying aircraft, but also posed a danger to lightly protected ground targets. Its open turret facilitated tracking moving targets, though it left the crew exposed. Seeking greater range and firepower, the flak Panzer IV Ostwind was developed. Instead of multiple small guns, this model opted for a single, larger-caliber piece capable of reaching aircraft at greater distances. Although it fired at a slower rate, it compensated for this disadvantage with a more powerful impact, expanding the mobile unit's anti-aircraft defense options. As an intermediate solution, the flak Panzer 38T offered minimal protection and a simple platform for mounting an anti-aircraft gun. Its design left the crew highly exposed, limiting its use in high-risk areas. Even so, it fulfilled the basic function of providing cover against air attacks in situations where no more robust alternatives were available. Before tanks dominated the pace of the war, the German army began solving a more basic but decisive problem: how to move guns, ammunition, and troops across uneven terrain without relying on good roads. At this early stage, motorization was not intended for direct combat, but to support it, and this is where the SDKFZ-11 appeared. This vehicle became one of the first pillars of German mobility, acting as the standard tractor for light artillery. It was seen towing pieces, transporting full crews, and maintaining movement even when the terrain became difficult. It was not a flashy vehicle, but a constant presence used before the war and across all fronts, marking the starting point of a doctrine that relied on not stopping. From this concept, the SDKFZ-10 emerged, a smaller and more specialized version that refined the same idea. This half-track was designed for lighter tasks, especially towing anti-tank guns and smaller pieces. Its smaller size allowed it to move with greater agility, position quickly, and withdraw just as fast. On the battlefield, it served a clear function, bringing the right weapon to the exact spot where it was needed, without carrying unnecessary weight. This specialization made it one of the most common vehicles present in early campaigns and widely used throughout the war. As the weight of armament increased, the need for a more powerful tractor led to the development of the SDKFZ-7. This vehicle represented a decisive intermediate step, capable of towing heavy artillery and, above all, the famous 88mm gun. In action, the SDKFZ-7 not only transported the weapon but also its full crew, ammunition, and equipment, functioning as a mobile unit in itself. Its presence became routine in deployments where heavy fire had to be moved quickly, consolidating a doctrine already mature in which artillery did not wait for the front but followed it. The same principle of accompaniment took a significant step forward when infantry stopped advancing on foot behind the tanks. The SDKFZ-251 Hanomag was the vehicle that materialized this change. Designed to transport infantry under protection, it allowed grenadiers to advance with the tanks, disembark at the exact point, and immediately engage in action. In combat, the Hanomag appeared advancing through dust, deploying troops, and staying close to provide support. It was not just transport, it was an active part of the movement, a key element of mechanized infantry that defined the German way of fighting. From the same logic, but adapted to more specific tasks, the SDKFZ-250 was developed. Shorter and with less capacity, this vehicle was mainly used for reconnaissance, command, and specific missions. Its size allowed it to move discreetly, advance ahead of the main columns, and maintain links between units. Instead of carrying large groups, it transported small teams that required speed and flexibility. It was the natural complement to the 251, designed for more tactical and precise functions within the same mobility scheme. When the terrain became truly extreme, one of the most unique vehicles in the German arsenal appeared, the Kettenkrad. Half motorcycle and half track, this hybrid moved where others got stuck. In deep mud, snow, or destroyed roads, the Kettenkrad kept moving, transporting men, cables, ammunition, or towing small loads. Its size was deceptive, as it could perform tasks that normally required larger vehicles. On many fronts, it was even seen operating alone, crossing difficult zones and maintaining communications when everything else failed. As tanks grew in size and weight, a new problem arose: recovering them when they became stuck or damaged. The answer was the SDKFZ-9FAMO, a heavy half-track designed for a specific and demanding task. Its function was not tied to direct combat but to constant work behind the front line, ensuring that damaged or immobilized armored vehicles could be recovered, dragged out of dangerous areas, and returned to service instead of being left on the field as permanent losses for advancing units. Finally, when the war shifted east and mud became a constant enemy, an improvised but effective solution appeared: the Opel Maltier. Based on conventional trucks, rear tracks were added to improve traction. They were not half-tracks designed from scratch, but they fulfilled a vital function. On roads turned into genuine mud fields, the Maltier kept moving with supplies, ammunition, and fuel. Its appearance was late and born of urgency, but it allowed movement to continue when wheeled vehicles could no longer do so. German armored reconnaissance developed as a need of its own, separate from direct combat and independent of fire support. Its role was not to attack or hold a position, but to move ahead of everyone, observe the terrain, identify routes, detect the enemy, and return with accurate information. For this task, fast vehicles with some protection and the ability to operate independently over long distances were required. Under this logic, the first models specifically designed to fulfill this role began to appear. The SDKFZ-222 was one of the vehicles that embodied this idea in its most direct form. Designed as a fast scout, it combined high mobility with sufficient armament to face light threats during its patrols. In scenarios with good road networks, it could move quickly, cover long distances, and maintain constant motion, making it a regular part of the reconnaissance battalions of armored divisions. However, this effectiveness depended on avoiding being pinned down in combat. When the SDKFZ-222 was forced to operate under intense fire or against superior forces, its limited protection became apparent. In such cases, crew survival relied more on rapid withdrawal and coordination with other units than on offensive capability, clearly defining the limits of its use in prolonged operations. As the operational range expanded, the need arose for a reconnaissance vehicle with greater autonomy and presence. In this context, the SDKFZ-231 came into play, a heavy, 8-wheeled armored vehicle representing a leap in size and capabilities. This vehicle was designed to cover long distances without relying on nearby support, maintaining high speed on roads and firm surfaces. One of its most distinctive features was the presence of 2 driver stations, allowing it to move forward or retreat quickly without turning, a key advantage when the situation changed suddenly. The SDKFZ-231 was employed as a long-range scout. Its size gave it an imposing presence, and its design allowed it to remain operational during extended missions. In early operations, it was used to secure routes, patrol wide areas, and maintain contact between dispersed units. Although its off-road performance was limited, in regions with adequate infrastructure, it performed its function effectively, providing a broad view of the terrain ahead of the main columns. Based on this experience, German industry sought to perfect the concept of armored reconnaissance, pushing it to the limits of what a wheeled vehicle could offer. The result was the SDKFZ-234/2, unofficially known as Puma. This model was conceived as a high-performance scout, capable of combining speed, range, and firepower superior to its predecessors. Its design was aimed at operating in open spaces, covering long distances, and reacting quickly to any unexpected contact. The Puma stood out for its ability to maneuver agilely and maintain a high pace over long operational days. Its armament allowed it to engage other reconnaissance vehicles and even respond to greater threats if the situation required, though it always prioritized avoiding direct combat. Its role remained to observe, report, and withdraw, but now with a greater margin of safety against unexpected encounters. In the final years of the war, when fronts became more extended and lines less defined, this vehicle became an especially valuable tool for covering large sectors quickly. Alongside these scouts, there was an equally important need: maintaining communications. Obtaining information was of little use if it could not be transmitted quickly and securely. For this role, the SDKFZ-263 was developed, a vehicle specifically designed as a communications platform. Unlike other models, this armored vehicle was not intended for active scouting, but served as a link between units, commands, and forward posts. Its most visible feature was a large antenna, which revealed its function even from a distance. The SDKFZ-263 operated near reconnaissance units, but its primary task was to receive and relay information. From inside, it coordinated movements, transmitted orders, and maintained contact between different command levels. Although it had basic protection and limited armament for defense, its true value lay in its ability to keep the communications network active even under difficult conditions. In many operations, this vehicle remained in the background, but without it, the flow of information would have been interrupted. Beyond the large armored vehicles and the vehicles designed to sustain full operations, the German army relied on a wide range of light means that handled daily tasks, rapid movements, and functions that required flexibility more than force. These vehicles were not intended to dominate the battlefield, but to move freely within it, adapt to varied terrain, and maintain the continuous activity of the units. In this space, a very diverse category emerged consisting of light cars, off-road vehicles, and motorcycles, each with a specific role in the daily functioning of the war. One of the most distinctive examples was the Volkswagen Schwimmwagen. This vehicle was born from the need to move uninterruptedly in areas crossed by rivers, lakes, and flooded terrain. Its design allowed it to move on land and, without stopping, enter the water and continue floating. In operations where natural crossings were constant, the Schwimmwagen became an extremely useful tool. Its compact size facilitated the transport of small groups, liaison personnel, or light supplies, and its amphibious capability eliminated the need to search for bridges or safe passages. Throughout the war, thousands of units were produced, making it the most produced amphibious vehicle of its kind. And its presence was common on fronts where water was a regular part of the landscape. Within units, the Schwimmwagen was mainly assigned to liaison tasks, light reconnaissance, and rapid transport of personnel or messages. Its use was integrated into the daily dynamics of mobile formations, accompanying command posts, forward patrols, and coordination elements. It was not designed for direct combat, but its constant availability and ease of use made it a regular resource within the German structure. In a different area, the Porsche 108 appeared, a heavy off-road vehicle designed for continuous work off-road. This model was intended for towing and transport tasks under difficult conditions, where a robust and reliable vehicle was needed. Its use was focused on agricultural and support work, but it was also incorporated for military tasks requiring strength and stability. The Porsche 108 stood out for its ability to operate for long days in challenging terrain, becoming a solid tool for functions that required endurance more than speed. This vehicle represented a practical solution for moving loads and equipment in areas where other means failed. Its presence was not striking, but it performed a constant function in the daily workflow of units, maintaining operational flow in situations where mobility was a permanent challenge. As the war progressed, another light vehicle gained prominence due to its reliability under extreme conditions. The Steyr 1500A was designed as a robust off-road vehicle capable of operating in both cold and hot climates. Its four-wheel drive and solid construction allowed it to move safely on difficult roads, uneven terrain, and in areas with minimal infrastructure. This vehicle was widely used for personnel transport, command tasks, and liaison functions, becoming one of the most versatile vehicles in the German army. The Steyr 1500A was employed by different branches of the armed forces and adapted to multiple configurations. It could transport small groups, serve as a command vehicle, or perform support tasks without requiring complex modifications. Its reliability made it particularly valued on fronts where mechanical wear was constant and climatic conditions tested any design. Throughout the conflict, this vehicle remained in continuous service, demonstrating remarkable adaptability. In a completely different context, the Mercedes-Benz G4 appeared. This vehicle was not intended for everyday use or normal operational tasks. Its function was ceremonial and propagandistic, and its presence was associated with parades, official events, and carefully planned tours. With its large size and imposing design, the G4 became a recurring symbol of the regime's display of power. Although it had moderate off-road capabilities, its actual use was mainly related to representation and public visibility. The Mercedes-Benz G4 was produced in very limited numbers and was almost exclusively intended for high-ranking commanders and key figures of the regime. Its appearance at official events reinforced the image of control and authority, making it a symbol rather than an operational tool. Unlike other light vehicles, its value did not lie in what it did in the field, but in what it represented to those who saw it. At the opposite end, individual mobility found its peak expression in the BMW R75 motorcycle. Specifically designed for military use, this motorcycle with a powered sidecar was intended to move through difficult terrain while maintaining stability and control. Its configuration allowed it to travel on narrow roads, rural areas, and uneven surfaces where larger vehicles had difficulty. The BMWR-75 was used for liaison missions, rapid personnel transport, and tasks requiring swift arrival at specific points. The powered sidecar provided additional capacity to tow light loads or carry a second occupant while maintaining traction in challenging situations. This motorcycle was used in both cold climates and desert regions, demonstrating remarkable adaptability. Its use extended throughout the war, and its design influenced later developments due to its effectiveness under demanding conditions. The BMWR-75 enabled the maintenance of communications, the delivery of orders, and the connection of units in an agile manner. Its small size and ability to move off-road made it a key tool for rapid tasks, where time was a decisive factor. Although it was not intended for direct combat, its presence was constant in the daily operations. The German war effort was not sustained by weapons and armor alone. Behind every movement, every advance, and every retreat, there existed a constant transport network that had to operate without interruption. Ammunition, fuel, food, spare parts, equipment, and personnel moved every day along roads, secondary paths, and improvised routes. This task fell to the logistical trucks, vehicles that rarely appeared in heroic accounts, but set the real pace of the war. If these trucks stopped, everything else stopped with them. From the very beginning of the conflict, the German army relied on a model that could be produced in large quantities and perform multiple functions without complications. In this context, the Opel Blitz appeared, which quickly became the standard truck of the logistical system. Its presence was so widespread that it was impossible to travel along a front without encountering entire columns of these vehicles moving in one direction or another. The Blitz was used to transport troops to the front, evacuate the wounded, move ammunition, deliver fuel, and supply entire units for days. The Opel Blitz stood out for its simplicity. It was not a complex or sophisticated vehicle, but that simplicity was precisely its greatest strength. It could be driven by minimally trained personnel, repaired relatively easily, and adapted to various tasks without extensive modifications. Depending on the need, it could appear with an open or closed cargo bed, with benches for transporting soldiers, or adapted for specific functions within the logistical chain. This versatility allowed the Blitz to remain operational throughout the war, even as conditions grew increasingly difficult. Its use became widespread at all levels of the logistical system. It moved in large convoys on main roads as well as in small groups on secondary routes, aiming to reduce exposure to enemy attacks. In rear areas, it performed continuous redistribution tasks, transporting supplies from central depots to intermediate points, while at the front, it ensured the regular delivery of resources necessary to maintain unit activity. In addition to its primary role as a transport vehicle, the Blitz was also used for auxiliary tasks such as towing light guns, mobile kitchens, or small field workshops. These functions integrated it into the daily operations of the units, covering specific needs within the logistical network without replacing specialized vehicles. Over time, the Opel Blitz was produced in large quantities, which facilitated maintenance due to the availability of spare parts and the personnel's familiarity with the vehicle. This widespread presence made its silhouette familiar not only to German forces but also to enemy armies, which occasionally reused captured vehicles. In this way, the Blitz became one of the clearest symbols of mobile German logistics. Alongside the Opel Blitz, another truck continued to operate that represented an earlier stage, but was still fundamental to military transport: the Krupp Protzer. This vehicle was designed as an all-terrain solution for transporting infantry and towing light artillery. Its three-axle configuration and low profile provided particular stability, allowing safer movement over uneven terrain compared to other trucks of its time. The Krupp Protzer was widely used during the early years of the conflict. It transported soldiers to contact lines and moved light artillery pieces to advanced positions. Its design allowed relatively fast loading and efficient unloading, making it useful in situations where time was a critical factor. Although it offered no protection, its function was not direct combat, but ensuring that units reached their destinations with all their equipment. This truck also performed liaison and support tasks. Often it carried technical personnel, communications equipment, or essential supplies to maintain the operational readiness of units. Its reliability allowed it to remain in service even as newer models appeared. The Protzer was not immediately retired, but continued to be used wherever it fulfilled its role without issue. The Krupp-Protzer was distinguished by its ability to operate on poor roads. In regions with limited infrastructure, this truck could advance more safely than other conventional wheeled vehicles. This characteristic made it especially useful in early campaigns, when the pace of advance required solutions that did not rely solely on well-maintained roads. As the war progressed and logistical demands increased, the Protzer gradually moved to secondary tasks, but it never disappeared completely. It remained in units that needed a reliable vehicle for mixed transport, combining personnel and light weaponry. This continuity demonstrates that, although surpassed by later designs, the Krupp-Protzer remained functional within the German logistical system. Both the Opel Blitz and the Krupp-Protzer reflect a key phase of German military transport in which the priority was to move large volumes of resources consistently. These vehicles were not designed to stand out individually, but to integrate into a wide and permanent network. Their daily work sustained unit operations, ensuring supplies arrived on time and operations could continue without interruption. The success of many operations depended on these trucks completing their routes under increasingly difficult conditions. As long as transport remained active, the system could sustain the advance and activity of units at the front. Conversely, when vehicles were out of service due to wear, enemy attacks, or terrain problems, the impact was immediately felt throughout the supply chain. For this reason, beyond the most visible or striking models, logistical trucks were part of the constant flow that kept German forces moving, covering long distances and operating continuously throughout the conflict. Within this supply network, vehicles began to appear designed for situations where conventional trucks could no longer fulfill their task. The expansion of the fronts into regions with extreme climates and poor infrastructure forced the German logistical system to adapt to increasingly demanding conditions. Where roads disappeared under mud or snow, transport could not stop, and in this scenario, more specialized solutions came into play. One vehicle that responded directly to this problem was the Raupenschlepper Ost, known as the RSO. This tracked tractor was designed to operate in terrain where wheeled trucks would become immobilized. Its design prioritized mobility over speed, accepting slow movement in exchange for constant traction. In practice, the RSO became an indispensable vehicle for maintaining the flow of supplies in areas where deep mud and snow made each kilometer an obstacle. The RSO was used to tow guns, transport ammunition, and move essential loads under extreme conditions. Its simple construction facilitated maintenance, which was crucial on fronts with limited resources. Although its speed was low, it moved steadily, even when other vehicles were completely stuck. In many cases, its presence made the difference between a supplied and an isolated unit. This tractor also served to transport personnel in difficult sections, bringing soldiers and equipment to areas that would otherwise be inaccessible. Its adaptation to climate and terrain made it especially valuable on the Eastern Front, where the seasons dictated the pace of logistical operations. The RSO was not meant to replace trucks, but to complement the system where it failed. While these specialized vehicles covered the most critical points, the system still depended on heavy trucks capable of moving large loads from the rear. In this role, the Henschel 33 continued to operate, a truck developed before the war that, despite its age, remained functional. This vehicle was intended for transporting bulky loads and heavy equipment, performing essential tasks on relatively stable routes. The Henschel 33 was used to move construction materials, machinery, large quantities of supplies, and technical equipment. Its robust structure allowed intensive use over long periods. Although it lacked the off-road capabilities of more modern models, its reliability kept it in service throughout the conflict. In areas where roads were still passable, this truck carried much of the heavy transport. This model mainly operated in rear areas and intermediate supply lines. From there, loads were redistributed to other vehicles better suited for difficult conditions. The Henschel 33 was not versatile in terms of adaptation, but its mechanical durability made it a reliable element within the logistical chain. Seeking greater standardization, Germany promoted the development of the Einheitsdiesel, a truck designed to unify components and simplify maintenance in an increasingly demanding system. This model was produced by different manufacturers following the same design, aiming to facilitate the supply of spare parts and reduce mechanical diversity within the army. Its all-wheel drive allowed it to operate off-road, expanding mobility options in difficult terrain. The Einheitsdiesel was used for a wide range of logistical tasks. It transported general supplies, communications equipment, mobile workshops, and field kitchens. Its ability to adapt to various functions made it useful in scenarios where flexibility was required. Unlike simpler trucks, this model performed better off-road, making it valuable on fronts with limited infrastructure. However, this standardization also implied a more complex construction. The Einheitsdiesel required more resources for production and maintenance, which limited the number of available units. Still, where it operated, it provided an effective solution to maintain the logistical flow under difficult conditions. Its presence reinforced the system's ability to sustain prolonged operations without relying solely on paved roads. Together, these vehicles completed a logistical network that had to function continuously. The Opel Blitz carried the main volume of supplies, the Krupp Protzer covered mixed transport and light towing, the RSO ensured mobility under extreme conditions, the Henschel 33 carried heavy loads in the rear, and the Einheitsdiesel provided all-wheel drive in challenging areas. Each occupied a defined place within the network without overlapping functions. German logistics depended on all these elements working in coordination. The trucks covered long distances, stopped to load and unload, and set off almost immediately again. Wear was constant, and maintenance became a daily task. Nevertheless, as long as these vehicles kept moving, the system managed to sustain operations on very diverse fronts under increasingly adverse conditions. In the German war, there were vehicles that were not intended to move every day or to constantly accompany the units. Their appearance responded to very specific situations, moments in which a specific and concentrated effect was sought. These special vehicles were not part of the normal flow at the front, but came into play when the goal was to saturate an area, break a specific resistance, or cause an immediate impact. Within this group were some of the most unusual designs of the conflict, created for tasks that could not be solved with conventional means. One of these vehicles was the Panzer 42. Its development was linked to the idea of motorizing multiple rocket launchers, which until then depended on trailers and long repositioning times. The problem was evident. After firing a salvo, the launch positions were exposed due to smoke, noise, and visible tracks. To reduce this risk, a platform that could fire and move quickly was sought. The solution was to mount the Nebelwerfer on an armored half-track, giving rise to the Panzerwerfer. This vehicle was intended to carry out saturation bombardments. Its function was not precision, but to cover large areas with a high number of rockets in a very short time. When in action, it fired complete salvos that fell on troop concentrations, defensive positions, or enemy assembly areas. The effect was measured not only in material damage, but also in the immediate impact produced by the noise, smoke, and violence of the bombardment. Production of the Panzerwerfer began in 1943, and it was tested in combat on the Eastern Front. There it was used to attack large Soviet concentrations where conventional artillery fire was less effective than a massive rocket barrage. The vehicle allowed approaching, firing the salvo, and withdrawing before the enemy could respond with counter-battery fire. This mobility clearly distinguished it from towed rocket launchers. Over time, the Panzerwerfer was also employed on the Western Front. After the Allied landings, British, Canadian, and American troops encountered this type of weapon in Normandy. Although the Nebelwerfer was already known, the fact that it was mounted on an armored and camouflaged half-track surprised many units. Its use intensified during the summer of 1944, especially against troop concentrations and defensive positions. The Panzerwerfer did not operate in isolation. It usually acted in organized units, accompanied by vehicles dedicated to ammunition transport that followed the launchers. After firing, the Panzerwerfer had to be quickly resupplied to be ready for a new mission. Its use continued until the last months of the war, when it was employed defensively as German forces retreated and tried to slow the enemy advance. Despite its firepower, the Panzerwerfer had clear limitations. Its range was less than that of conventional heavy artillery, and its accuracy decreased with distance. Additionally, its chassis was not originally conceived as a combat vehicle, which affected its off-road mobility. Still, it fulfilled its main function, bringing rocket bombardment to a mobile platform capable of acting quickly. On a completely different level, the German war also gave rise to one of the most extreme siege vehicles ever built, the Karl Gerät. This self-propelled mortar was conceived before the outbreak of the war, in a context where it was still considered necessary to destroy massive concrete fortifications using giant-caliber artillery. Its initial goal was to attack permanent defensive systems, such as the Maginot Line. The Karl Gerät was a self-propelled mortar of colossal dimensions. It fired projectiles weighing about 2 tons, designed to penetrate and destroy fortified structures. Its size and weight were so extreme that its mobility was severely limited. Although it had its own engines, they were mainly used for short maneuvers. For long transfers, the vehicle had to be dismantled and transported by rail or special trailers. Between 1940 and 1941, the first operational units were delivered. A total of 7 mortars were built, 6 of them intended for combat and 1 for testing. Each received its own name following a symbolic tradition that reflected its exceptional character. To operate these mortars, specific units were created, and each Karlgerät had several support vehicles responsible for transporting ammunition and assisting with loading tasks. The Karlgerät's combat debut took place during the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. 2 of these mortars were deployed against Soviet fortifications, firing dozens of shells in the first days of the operation. However, technical and mechanical problems limited their time in combat, and after brief use, they were withdrawn for repairs and adjustments. In 1942, the Karlgerät was used again during the siege of Sevastopol. There, several mortars were deployed in carefully prepared positions. For weeks, they fired hundreds of shells at Soviet fortifications, causing significant damage to concrete structures, although the results did not always justify the enormous logistical effort required to keep them operational. After that campaign, the mortars were again withdrawn for maintenance. As the war progressed, the Karlgerät was used increasingly sparingly. In 1944, one of these mortars was deployed during the Warsaw Uprising, where it was used in an urban environment. In that context, its ability to destroy entire buildings with few shots was especially evident. However, its use remained limited by the complexity of deployment and the need for extensive site preparation. Throughout the conflict, the Karlgerät represented a form of warfare that was becoming obsolete. Although its power was undeniable, its low rate of fire, limited range compared to other weapons, and vulnerability during setup made it a very specialized resource. Its mere presence required disproportionate logistical planning, which reduced real opportunities for employment. Both the Panzer IV and the Karlgerät illustrate 2 very different approaches within the concept of special-purpose vehicles. While one prioritized mobility and the ability to launch saturation attacks in a short time, the other was designed to apply extreme force against very specific targets. Both emerged as responses to particular needs of the moment and show how, in certain contexts of the conflict, unconventional solutions were sought when conventional means were insufficient. Along the same path of extreme solutions, the German war effort also explored a very different idea, not oriented toward mass firepower or the destruction of large fortifications, but toward the precise elimination of specific targets using remotely controlled means. In this context, one of the smallest and at the same time most unique vehicles of the conflict appeared, the Goliath, officially identified as SDKFZ 302 and SDKFZ 303, depending on the version. The Goliath was not a combat vehicle in the traditional sense. It was a small, tracked platform designed to carry an explosive charge to a specific target. Its small size allowed it to move through streets, trenches, or uneven terrain without drawing too much attention. The idea was simple. The operator guided the vehicle from a safe position via a cable, directed it to the target, and detonated the charge at the right moment. This concept began development before the war reached its most intense phase. The original intention was to create a means capable of destroying fortified positions, machine gun nests, obstacles, or enemy vehicles without exposing soldiers directly. The Goliath moved slowly, but its low profile gave it some advantage in approaching protected targets. The first versions of the Goliath used electric motors. This made them relatively quiet, an important advantage for approach missions. However, that same characteristic limited their range, as they relied on batteries that had to be recharged frequently. To solve this problem, a later version was developed equipped with a combustion engine, which increased its autonomy and facilitated its use in longer operations. The Goliath was controlled via a cable that was deployed as the vehicle advanced. Through that cable, the operator sent movement commands and activated the detonation. This system allowed precise control, but also introduced an obvious vulnerability. If the cable was cut, the Goliath became useless. In combat, this weakness was quickly identified by enemy forces. The Goliath was used on various fronts, both in the east and the west. It was employed to attack tanks, destroy defensive positions, and open breaches in fortified areas, with variable results depending on the tactical situation. In some cases, it achieved its objective, causing significant damage with a single vehicle, especially when operating from concealed positions with the element of surprise. During the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, the Goliath was used in urban environments, where its small size allowed it to move among rubble and narrow streets. In that scenario, its ability to carry an explosive charge into buildings or improvise positions proved particularly destructive. Nevertheless, its use remained limited and required very specific conditions to be effective. As the war progressed, the Goliath demonstrated both the potential and limitations of the concept. Its production continued, but it never reached mass use comparable to other vehicles. The manufacturing cost, combined with its fragility in combat, made its cost-to-result ratio questionable. Still, it continued to be deployed in situations where there were no safer alternatives to neutralize certain targets. The Goliath was not designed to survive the mission. It was a single-use vehicle, intended to be destroyed along with its charge. This logic set it completely apart from the rest of the German mobile arsenal. Its value lay not in durability or reuse, but in the possibility of eliminating a specific target without immediately risking the crew. Overall, the Goliath represented one of the most radical approaches to mechanized warfare. While other vehicles sought mobility, power, or protection, this one relied on remote control and pinpoint destruction. Its existence reflects how far the conflict pushed engineers to explore unconventional solutions, even when their practical effectiveness was limited. When observing this group of vehicles as a whole, it is clear that they were not designed for a stable or predictable war. Each one appeared when the problem no longer admitted simple solutions. The Panzer IV sought to compensate for a lack of time with mass fire, the Karlgerät tried to destroy with brute force what could not be taken by attrition, and the Goliath aimed to eliminate targets without directly exposing soldiers. They were concrete responses to extreme situations designed for specific moments, not to sustain daily frontline operations. But behind these machines lay a deeper reality. By the time many of these vehicles entered service, Germany was already fighting with increasingly scarce resources, an industry under constant bombing and growing pressure on all fronts. Engineering continued to advance, but the capacity to produce in quantity, maintain service, and replace losses no longer matched that level of complexity. In many cases, enormous technical and logistical efforts resulted in vehicles impressive in design, but present in numbers too small to change the course of the war. More than decisive weapons, these developments reflect the state of a system trying to solve strategic problems with increasingly specific solutions. Each new vehicle sought to compensate for a concrete disadvantage: lack of mobility, need for immediate fire, inability to breach defenses, or excessive risk to crews. However, none of these isolated responses could replace what had already been lost in terms of time, resources, and control of the conflict. Thus, special purpose and siege vehicles do not represent the maximum power of the German arsenal, but its point of tension. They are the result of a war that pushed designers to explore the limits of technology in an attempt to sustain an increasingly difficult situation. They were not everyday tools, nor did they change the overall course of the conflict, but they did leave a clear image of how far a system can go when conventional means are no longer enough and extreme solutions become the last option.